Now, again, to an external challenge to Integral, a challenge from its environment. And yet again, it's Peterson who really puts his finger on it, and it's the problem of honesty. For Integral to do a good job, it really depends on people being integrated in their thinking. This is to say, to really ground their thinking in actual experience and to be honest about what they have to say, and to be transparent about the limits of their understanding. I think in society in general, most of the spheres that we inhabit don't have rules that would support this kind of transparency, openness, and admission of one's own limit of understanding. In most societal spheres, you actually end up at the disadvantage if you approach them with this level of honesty. You basically are being treated as someone who is naive. You have to find ways to sell yourself at a particularly high price. And this goes through all of our social spheres, from our interpersonal encounters, our love relationships, to even our highly specialized academic disciplines. And that's a really big challenge for Integral, because what Integral is working with is it needs some actual meat. It needs some actual content. It cannot really work on thin air, pretense, or thin soup. It really must be built on actual experiences, actual knowledge, and actual observations. And as far as I can see, even our academic disciplines are not optimized for this kind of approach. It would be in your own disfavor if you were to be honest about the limits of your understanding. I remember, this has a few aspects to it. On the one hand, it makes it very difficult for integral theory to really pick out the valuable contributions if people are not honest about the limits of what they know and what they don't. And many really don't see the importance of the tell the truth imperative that Jordan Peterson is so insisting on. Because it really starts with very simple embodied attitudes and goes all the way to how we make knowledge in general. And it's not only about consciously deceiving someone, but it's about your very understanding of what truth actually is, which Peterson is basically touching. And integral theory, of course, is also touching with this idea that knowledge is not something that comes from one specific structure of consciousness, but it's something that is embodied in something that goes all the way down. In other words, in integral theory, you have the idea that past generations, just as past creatures, they weren't simply wrong. It wasn't that their understanding of the world was simply false and we found the right propositions, the right descriptions of the world from a specific point on in time. No, their perspectives were adequate up to a certain point. There was some inherent truth, in other words, or to put it differently, past generations, past views, as well as creatures that existed a long time ago, up to a certain point where we're in actual touch with reality. They're not just fabulating a wrong kind of world, but they were up to a certain degree in touch with reality. And integral theory has a really nice way of integrating this idea that truthfulness is not only about telling the truth, but about grounding your own knowledge in legitimate sources, and deriving your knowledge from sources that actually can grant you knowledge and not be mistaken on that. Because that kind being lost in thought without being aware of where thinking comes from and what thinking actually does is a form of lying to others and to yourself, because you're using language without really understanding what you're saying and without really being aware of the kind of meaning that you're trying to get across. This blind usage of language being lost in perspective and being lost in words is a form of dishonesty. And we find it everywhere around us, and it's a really, really huge challenge for Integral. And I have a few ideas on how to cope with this. But yet again, if we don't tackle this problem, if we don't find ways of systematically forcing all societal spheres to step by step become more open to the idea of honesty, we will be yet again that fish in the water. There's just no way of doing Integral in an environment that is so hostile to authenticity and to being really honest about who it is and where it stands at. I can remember, maybe I already mentioned this, but in my entire university career, I couldn't remember professors being really honest about what they don't know. It was the first time I heard someone speak about what he doesn't understand was Hubert Dreyfus on a lecture where he came in and admitted that he had been talking nonsense in the past lecture. For me, this was an extremely valuable experience, because once you grasp the limits of those who are teaching you, you can better understand where they're coming from, you can better situate them, and they become human. They become something that is attainable. In other words, it becomes much more possible for you to become like them. You feel like you have a job to do here, you feel like you can contribute something to this world, and what they have achieved in a way also seems much more achievable and much more doable. This has not only a pedagogical element to it, but I think it's also crucially important in making more transparent our perspective. But I also must admit, even within Integral circles, I have not seen this degree of honesty and self-transparency. I, for example, can't remember Wilbur ever being really honest about what he doesn't know. And I'm not talking about the kind of, we don't know what makes the universe run, kind of we don't know, you know. I really mean his true uncertainties, his actual uncertainties. But this would have pedagogical value on the one hand, and it also would make the theory itself much more human. It would give it an actual human face. Yet on the other hand, I'm not sure. Maybe you just can't make it within any kind of profession unless you're able to play the game of pretending to be someone you're not. Simply just as you can't make it in social media unless you pretend you're someone that you're not. But I think it's worth thinking about this. Whether it's possible for us to bring the more human aspect, the more fallible aspect, well, fallible is the wrong word, but the more imperfect aspect into the picture and be fully honest about it and admit our own limits. This would significantly make Integral more easy or possible. And if we can't do it, Integral just will remain, just for this one single reason, impossible, because there is no way of getting at the heart of uncovering truth in all these individual cases where people just play the game of pretending. You will just not have the time to do this. Neither, I think, you would be able to sustain any kind of motivation to do it, because it's just so tedious. So we have to find a way to deal with that. And I have a few ideas that I want to share later.